Good afternoon, everyone in Switzerland. My name is Bob Giuffra. It's my privilege to be chairman of the American Swiss Foundation, along with my good friend Marcus Diethelm. Hope everybody is having a great day. We just finished our Young Leaders Conference in Zurich. It was sponsored by Swiss Re, and we wouldn't have been able to accomplish it as we have since 1990 without the steadfast support of Swiss International Airlines. So when you're flying from the U.S. to Switzerland, please fly with Swiss. Now, the U.S. election is a really interesting topic. We're 11 months out from Election Day. This will be literally the 60th presidential election in the U.S.'s history. Joe Biden is running for re-election. Donald Trump is seeking his job back. He'd like to be the second president to achieve something that the only other president was Grover Cleveland, which is to win, lose, and then win again. And both of them are clear front runners in their parties. There really isn't a real opposition to Biden. And if Biden and Trump are both renominated, this will be the first presidential rematch in an election since Adlai Stevenson and Dwight Eisenhower in 1956. And we'll also have two of the oldest presidents and candidates in U.S. history. Biden is, I think, just turned 81, will be 82, and Trump is 77. So certainly not the torch being passed to a new generation. We are very fortunate to have two outstanding young leaders to speak with today about these important issues. The first is Nick Johnston, who's the publisher of Axios. He's a young leader from the class of 2009. He is now the publisher of Axios. He was the editor-in-chief of Axios. He was previously the managing editor and reporter at Bloomberg. He began his journalism career at the Washington Post, and he is a graduate of Georgetown University. Manu Raju is now the anchor for Inside Politics Sunday. He is the chief congressional correspondent for CNN. He covers both the Congress and campaign politics. He is a young leader from the class of 2013, which was hosted by Wholesome and Swiss International Airlines in Zurich. He attended the University of Wisconsin in Madison with a degree in business administration. And during college, he was a sports editor for the Badger Herald student newspaper at the University of Wisconsin. Okay, why don't I ask both Nick and Manu just to give us your initial thoughts on where are we, almost a year out from the election. What do you expect to happen? Sort of what's the dynamics that we're now facing?
I can kick it off, I guess.
Go ahead. Good. Yeah.
Robert, thank you. Thank you so much for hosting this. Thank you so much for calling me a young leader. I guess it's a lifetime honorific. I don't feel like as young as I was when I came to Switzerland for the first time.
I'm an older leader than you are, and there are people even older than me.
It's young at heart leader, perhaps. I think I can be helpful in a big picture framing as how I've thought about elections my entire career as a political journalist, and how I always answer the question when people ask who is going to win and be president. The short answer is that incumbents tend to win. And so as a base case, when I think about how elections will play out, if you look at the last 50 years, certainly it's more likely that the president who is president or the president whose party has the White House is likely to win again. However, what makes these conversations interesting is thinking about those cases where that isn't the truth. And that doesn't happen, and the incumbent or the incumbent's party loses. And so there's three things that I think about a lot. I'm going to spend a lot of time thinking of over the next year. One is national mood, malaise. If you think about why Carter didn't win, even though he never said that word, that was kind of hanging over that election. And I think that led to him losing. A factor that fed into that a lot, I think, is the number two thing always on my mind is what is the state of the economy? Certainly in 1980, for Carter, the economy was in rough shape. For George H.W. Bush in 92, the economy was in rough shape. That feeds into the national mood. What's interesting about this election is that the economy is actually in awesome shape by the numbers. Look at the data. Things are going really well, but there's a lot of overhang, I think, on inflation that is still factoring into a lot of feelings politically, and that is, of course, a headwind for the incumbent, for President Biden. And then the third thing to think about is Donald Trump. Donald Trump defeated Hillary Clinton, the Democratic Party, because of Donald Trump's unique ability to marshal the electorate in ways that hadn't happened before. Donald Trump, however, that cuts both ways. Donald Trump, the incumbent, remember, lost for the same reasons of being Donald Trump. And so I think that is a huge wild card at the top of my mind, assuming that we have a Trump-Biden rematch. How those three things, national mood, the state of the economy, and the national view of Trump factor into what might lead to an incumbent losing. So sorry, didn't give you an answer on who's going to win, but it's exactly how I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I agree with a lot of that. And I think that it's, we are a deeply unsettled electorate. And this, to be able to handicap how this election a year out is going to shape up is impossible at this point. I think that, look, I mean, you've never before had a former president who's facing 91 criminal charges running for a second term. How does that impact the race? Does it impact the race at all? In his primary, it has made him stronger. But what does it mean for him in the general election? And what does that mean for him for suburban voters in particular, many of whom are not happy with Joe Biden, the direction of the country, but will they go back to Trump after Trump lost a lot of those suburban educated voters in the last election? That is going to be a big question for Biden. Biden consistently discounts questions about his age, but his age is a real factor. I mean, that is a predominant concern among voters. And, even though Trump is only 4 years younger, voters tend to view Biden's age as much more of a liability for him. So he, in the White House, his campaign had to think about that more rather than simply dismiss it. That's going to be a major issue. Obviously, the economy drives all elections. There have been positive signs that things are getting better on the inflation front, on the jobs front, but the Biden team will consistently complain that they're not getting credit for the actions that they took in the first 2 years of his administration, of the legislation that was passed in Congress. How are they able to sell that to voters? And even though polls should be concerning for the White House, they have dismissed that because they say the electorate has not been fully engaged yet, and that will change once the election takes shape. So there's just a lot of questions. The Israel-Hamas war impacting Biden's coalition, particularly among younger voters. We've seen a deterioration among support on some of those key constituencies and swing states like Michigan and others. That will be, this continues to play out, this war and his handling of it. How does that impact things in the long run? So there are just a ton of questions, which makes it just an impossible situation to handicap at the moment. But given the polarization of the electorate, I think we can bet that this is going to be a close election no matter what.
Well, let me ask you both the sort of question I've been thinking about, which is, do you think that the candidates on November in 2024 will be Biden and Trump? Or do you think that there's a possibility that something, unexpected could happen? Now, I've often wondered there's a risk of a health issue for either of them just by virtue of their age. And then Trump obviously has legal issues to deal with. He's got, still primaries to run. It's hard to see it, I guess this week on the Hannity show, Ron DeSantis is going to be debating Gavin Newsom. I mean, do you think the candidates will be Trump and Biden, or is there sort of a wild card that could still happen in the next 11 months?
I mean, I'll take a swing at that. Short answer, yes. Long answer, maybe. I think what's really interesting for those exact reasons you mentioned is that there is a lot of noise about their age, for both of them. There is a lot of just uncertainty in the electorate that no one is really happy with this matchup. So if the matchup is Trump, Biden, that is uniform across the polling. And so there is an opportunity for someone else. However, they're at the top of the ticket. And so remember, I don't think Joe Biden is this is a serious threat for many of the folks who have thrown their hat into the ring on the Democratic primary. But look, what is the scuttlebutt in Washington right now? It's Nikki Haley time. Everyone is excited about what moves she might make in Iowa and in New Hampshire. Our big Republican donors giving up on DeSantis and moving to her. So if you want to have something to talk about, that is the thing to talk about. But again, I always come back to base cases, and leaders tend to win and to become the nominees.
The problem,
Yeah,
I guess, on Nikki Haley, though, I think one of the things I've heard is that she may have the ability to get 30% of the Republican base, but she can't get the 50% of the Republican base.
Yeah, and look, the question is going to be if DeSantis doesn't do well in Iowa, and then he's put a lot of his eggs in the Iowa basket. Does he drop out at that point? And if Nikki Haley has a strong performance in Iowa, does his support go to her, or does his support go to Donald Trump? So, I mean, those are still a lot of questions about whether or not a true Trump alternative can emerge and has enough support to win and not lose in the delegate race, which ultimately is what matters. And for Biden, obviously he has not faced a serious primary challenge. There were Democrats who passed on an effort to challenge him in a primary because they wanted to fall behind their leader. But there's a long way to go. What if there's a health episode? What if something else happens and he changes his approach? And so it's all uncertain. But I would bet on a Trump versus Biden matchup.
To what extent do you think we can rely upon polls right now? I mean, a lot of emphasis has been placed on polls, and people think about polls, say, from 20 years ago. Now, with people very suspicious of pollsters, government, anyone, a lot of people don't, cell phones, don't answer their phones. And when I get a call from a pollster, I always just, I don't respond to it. To what extent can we even rely upon polls in making prognostication?
I wouldn't dismiss them entirely. I mean, I think there's two answers to that question. Can you rely on polls? I think you can. I think if you dig into what happened during the midterms, they weren't that terribly far off. I think the danger is overinterpreting the polls, and certainly can you rely on polls now? I am super skeptical, not skeptical, I am wary of polling done this far out, right? Like we haven't even started to winnow the field in Iowa and New Hampshire, which will happen, I think, starting in 49, 48 days. And so there can be a lot of movement. I should have this handed in my phone all the time, so I can talk about who is like, what were polling matchups 1 year out from the election. So we can talk about President Giuliani or President John Edwards. So, I mean, they can be very fluid. And so I take them all with a grain of salt looking that far ahead.
Yeah. And like a lot of the polls are national polls. So that's good at testing the national mood, how people feel about the president's job performance. It's not very good at determining the outcome. I mean, state by state, of course, are the most important. There was one that caught a lot of attention, a couple of weeks ago, the battleground polls that the New York Times did, and this number of these key battleground states that found Trump ahead in several of those states. That caused some alarm. But again, yes, I agree with Nick. It's a year out. A lot will change. But that doesn't mean that the political professionals shouldn't take note of where the electorate is at this point and make adjustments accordingly, because that is how the electorate feels. It may not determine the outcome, but it's not insignificant.
I think you made a very good point, particularly for our Swiss friends. It's important to keep in mind the Electoral College. I mean, we elect presidents on a state-by-state basis, and really the way, the country is fairly divided between blue states and red states, and there really are only, probably about 10 states that are really the swing states that drive elections. And, states like Pennsylvania and Michigan, or states that Trump won when he beat Hillary Clinton and then didn't do as well in the last election. But those swing states really are what drive, who wins and who loses. And let's talk about sort of the first battleground, which is going to be the Iowa caucuses. Now, in Iowa, the winner in the last three Republican caucuses, most recently Ted Cruz, did not go on to win. I think and DeSantis obviously has put a lot of weight into that. He's got the support of the governor, and he just got the support of a very big evangelical leader, Bob Vanderplaats. And obviously, if he can pull off either a close second or a victory, that would create some momentum. But then the problem is you end up going to New Hampshire and South Carolina, the next two states. And I think, that's what, Trump, I believe, lost to Cruz, and then he did well in New Hampshire and South Carolina, and then won the election, or won the nomination.
There's a lot of expectation setting, I think, which still has to happen, right? It's not necessarily winning Iowa. It's doing better than you expected to do in Iowa, which makes a big difference. Like you said, like the winner of Iowa tends not to be the next president. But
unless you're Barack Obama.
Right. But that was an expectation. setting, of course. And I was writing in 99 counties with John Edwards in 2008, and his expectation was one, and he came in third. And so that was it for him. And so I think what will be very interesting on the Republican side is like what that day after in Iowa looks like. Like Trump wins, sure, but okay, but who came second? Who did better than we thought in second? And that can be, as George H.W. Bush would always say, the big mo, which you would take to New Hampshire.
He won in 1980, but then lost in the nomination to Reagan. And then the next example of that is 88, when Bob Dole won in Iowa and lost to George H.W. Bush.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about momentum and the perception about how your campaign is doing. Because the second it feels like you're falling apart, then, or you didn't do as well as people expected, and your money dries up, the press basically counts you as dead in the water. Your voters who may be on the fence will want to choose a winner rather than a loser. So that has a huge impact. So that's why the polls, and say testing New Hampshire right now, it's really early to test it, because once Iowa is done, they'll have a huge impact on what happens in New Hampshire for a lot of those second and third place candidates.
Joe Biden would be 86 at the end of his second term. Trump would be 83. The selection of the vice president will probably be more important in this election than in others. Do you all think that Biden will stick with Kamala Harris or go to another horse?
I think he has to. I mean, at this point, I mean, if he changes, despite her numbers, which are not good. I mean, Biden's numbers are not good either. Trump's numbers aren't good either as well. Making a change like that would be something that I think would be totally unexpected, and may not really actually win him much support at the end of the day. It may not change anything other than show a campaign that is just desperate to shake things up, and that's not necessarily the narrative that he wants.
To kick a minority woman off the ticket would not be a good with his base, I would imagine.
And how many times have we had a conversation about a vice president that should be kicked off and swapped out for a ticket? It
Back when
never happened.
FDR changed vice presidents, I think, every term.
So if that's the last one you've got, it's been a while.
To what extent do you think that Trump's legal issues or problems will impact the upcoming election?
I thought one of the polls I've read that was most interesting was a second day poll the New York Times did off of their national poll, which is where they actually asked, would a conviction impact your vote? And according to that, like, that was the first time we've actually seen some of the first time I've seen, I think, a really explanation of some of how the rock solid support that Trump has enjoyed in the party's base would be affected by a conviction. Now, of course, I've been a journalist covering Trump since the day he came down the escalator, and for many, many times I have thought of seeing things that this will be the moment when people won't be backing him anymore, and none of those things have come true. So again, grain of salt. But if one of these cases, I think it's especially the one here in Washington, D.C., the January 6th case, if that is something that moves quickly and is adjudicated during the campaign, and if he is convicted, that could, I think, conceivably move the needle. But again, I'm very much, wait for verification to see if that actually does move people.
My understanding is, just in terms of the timing of all this, the January 6th case, which would be in Washington, which is not a great jurisdiction for Trump probably, is scheduled for March. The documents case, which is in Florida, where I think the judge is a Trump appointee, that case, I think, may not even happen until the election. The New York case, which is, I think, probably the weakest of the four cases, that's the case that probably probably June, July. And then this Georgia case, which is dangerous because some of the co-defendants are pleading. The district attorney was talking about doing an investigation, into next year. So it just adds a level of uncertainty, because I think if Trump could run the clock out on the cases, get elected on the federal cases, he could get his Justice Department to just knock them out. The problem is, I guess, on the state cases, you can't pardon the Constitution permits you to pardon for a state offense, but then you can't imprison or prosecute the sitting president. So then he just buys time till he's 83, and then maybe it just goes away at that point.
I think you'd have
Yeah,
to
I
have
mean, I
a
think that-
separate Zoom on the Georgia case if he is president and is convicted.
I also don't think that you should. I mean, what if he gets acquitted in one of these cases? I mean, what kind of impact would that be? Or at least there's a hung jury, or anything
Well, I
can
think the
happen
hung
in
jury is a
trial.
very real possibility in any of them, because you
Yeah,
get
exactly. And that,
12
and I
people
think
to
that,
agree on anything is not easy.
especially involving Donald Trump. And I think that, look, that could give him a boost potentially in his campaign. So I don't think we should discount that possibility. I do, I tend to think that yes, all these prosecutions have helped him with his base. I'm not convinced it helps him with swing voters, especially if he's convicted. But we'll see. That's one of the uncertainties here that we talked about here at the top.
To what extent do you think the recent election, particularly recent mid-year elections, or I guess they're not mid-year elections, most recent elections, particularly in Virginia, there had been a lot of talk about Glenn Youngkin coming into the race, and he was the savior, and he wasn't able to win either of his, this is in Virginia, wasn't able to win either his upper house or his lower house in the state legislature. And, there's some been, other than maybe DeSantis winning big in the last election, the Republicans really haven't been doing, particularly well since the Trump victory against Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, so the two takeaways from that is like people very quickly stopped talking about Glenn Youngkin for president. There's the big mo in action. What I think is also interesting in that is where suburban and abortion politics play into that, especially in Ohio. You saw that abortion constitutional amendment coast through. And so how will that as an issue play next year? And then again, another grain of salt you have to take all of these off-year and midterm elections with is that Donald Trump is nowhere on the ballot. And that even a Donald Trump endorsed candidate is a poor imitation, I think, electorally of for the original. And so there's a lot of trends that I see coming out of these mid-year and off-year elections that I'm hesitant to read too much into it, because again, that name Trump is not anywhere on the ballot.
Yeah, and I also don't think that you can't discount the power of abortion among women voters in suburban areas of the country, which has led to there have been 7 states so far that have had ballot referenda on abortion, and each time in those 7 states they have upheld abortion rights, including in a number of conservative states. And Ohio is a Republican state now, but also places like Kansas and the like. So that is an issue that Democrats will certainly lean into, as they did in the 2022 midterms, which helped them keep the Senate and almost keep the House, and did much better than anticipated. But I do agree, it's just, you look at polls, those show that abortion is an important issue, but not as high as other issues that rank, certainly not as high as the economy. So does that translate into success for Biden? We'll see, but that's clearly going to be one thing that they hit on pretty hard.
Well, how do you think it's going to shake out in terms of DeSantis and Haley, in terms of who will be the last person standing, and why isn't DeSantis doing as well as he was, say, a year ago?
Oh, who wants to jump on that? That's a really that's a good question. I don't like DeSantis never really caught fire like at all. And like
he won 60% of the vote in Florida, which is the ultimate swing state. He won Miami-Dade County, he won Palm Beach County, and
yeah, I mean, but he wasn't running against Donald Trump.
Is that as Trump got indicted, actually Trump went up, DeSantis went down, is essentially the way it kind of seemed to play out.
And look, I think he couldn't quite figure out his strategy against Trump, and Trump came out hammering him from even before he got into the race, because Trump viewed him and still views him as his biggest threat. And that had an impact with voters. DeSantis, too, it can be a little awkward and stilted on the campaign trail. That may not connect with some of the retail politics that is essential in Iowa and New Hampshire. And that, and I think that there have been questions about what his messaging and what is he running on exactly, that has failed to really, his message has sort of failed to catch fire in these early states. So a combination of those things.
One of the things that could affect this election is we may have some third-party candidates running, including one with a very famous last name, Robert Kennedy Jr. In other elections, people may remember, I think it was in 2000, excuse me, when Ralph Nader, I think, was the spoiler in the Bush versus Gore election. What extent do you think that one of these third-party candidates, Robert Kennedy, for example, could impact the final election results?
On a state by state level, that could be high. Remember, Nader was the difference in Florida. I think if you went and pulled out Jill Stein's numbers from 2016, Hillary Clinton would have coasted to victory. I think what Democrats are concerned about, and perhaps Republicans too, because when you dig into some of the RFK polling, he might pull from both sides.
You've seen as sort of a libertarian, anti-vaxxer type.
Exactly. And so where that gets very interesting is especially in swing states, where if Michigan is much closer than you think, and RFK Jr. has gotten himself on the ballot, or Joe Manchin is on the no labels. I don't know their ballot access credentials as of yet, but there is a lot of impact in just a small number of votes, tens of thousands in some of these close states that could tip it either way.
Yeah, and I think the Jill Stein impact is real. She's did hurt Hillary Clinton, as Nick noted, and because of the way Biden has been struggling with younger voters, the Green Party ticket can be attractive to younger liberal voters who may not be happy with Biden on any number of issues, whether it's about Israel, the Israel-Hamas war, about anything else. They don't believe he went far enough on student loans or whatever. That constituency has could find itself voting in significant numbers for Jill Stein, enough to tilt an election. So the question is going to be, how does the Biden campaign deal with this third party threat? Do they ignore it? Do they take it head on? Because I do think it's in a close election, it could make a huge difference.
Well, there could be an enthusiasm gap between Biden and Trump, in that the hardcore Trump voters will vote, early and often for Trump, whereas some of the Biden voters, particularly the younger voters, may be a little bit. And as you noted, the issues with Israel obviously complicate things in swing states like Michigan. Now, our Congress, let's just with a few minutes left, a lot of political battles going on. What do you make of the current configuration in Congress? Do the Republicans keep control of the House? Do they win? What happens in the Senate? And how is Mike Johnston, the new speaker, doing? I mean, it seems sort of like a do-nothing Congress on both sides, from what I can tell.
Yeah, there hasn't a whole lot been accomplished other than a lot of chaos. And we never before in the history of the country have seen a speaker kicked out in the middle of his term by his own party. It happened, of course, to Kevin McCarthy. They struggled for 22 days to name a new speaker. Mike Johnson has just been elected. He came essentially from a rank and file member that was not known beyond his own conference to now being the most powerful Republican in Washington. So how he handles some of the key issues that they got to deal with, whether it's keeping the government open past January and February, or finding a way to deal with aid to Israel, aid to Ukraine, all major issues they got to deal with, and then keeping the control of the House. So that is going to be incredibly difficult. Right now they have a narrow House majority, could get even narrower if George Santos, the New York Republican, gets expelled from the House as soon as this week. This will be the sixth time in history that has happened. Only the first time ever if it happens, for a member who has not been convicted of a crime yet. So put that issue aside, for keeping control of the House will be very difficult, especially some of these states where the battle we fought, like in New York, where these Republicans who won last time and gave them the majority.
Well, there's a big redistricting litigation in New York that could affect it. I mean, basically, the Republicans won the House because of some things that happened with redistricting in Florida and New York.
Yes,
and the margin was much smaller than people expected.
Yes, exactly, and now it could go the other way and give the Democrats the House, but the Senate is different. The Senate, the Republicans really have a leg up in the Senate. The map is much more favorable for them. There are a handful of states that Democratic held seats, in states like West Virginia, Montana, Ohio, where Trump won. Joe Manchin is not running for re-election in West Virginia. That's gone. That means that Republicans need to pick up a net of one, essentially, beyond the West Virginia seat to take the Senate. Unless they win the White House, the 50-50 Senate gives them the Senate control. There really are not many pickup opportunities for Democrats. Only in Florida and Texas, where Ted Cruz and Rick Scott are running, those are tough states for Democrats. So they really have to run the table. The Democrats do hold all their incumbents in difficult states to keep the majority, which will be incredibly hard in this environment. So if I had to predict, I would predict Democrats take the House, Republicans take the Senate, and we'll see if more years of gridlock ahead for the next president.
Nick?
I'm not going to disagree with somebody who's literally sitting in the basement of the U.S. Capitol. I found that very astute.
It's actually the third floor of the Capitol.
We have, I think we have maybe one more minute left. Nick, why don't you go first, and then Manu, what are the two or three things you would tell our Swiss friends about what to make of U.S. politics in November 2023?
Oh, Lord. Keep an eye on it. And watch for big events. Like, there's still a lot that can change, I think. Like, what is the outcome of the situation in the Middle East? What is the outcome of Donald Trump's legal troubles? And then where does the economy play out? If the Fed is really done hiking rates, I saw data today, they might cut in June. That could really change a national mood very quickly. So keep an eye on those three external events, I think, to inform what might happen.
I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, it's the nature of the unpredictable, especially, in the world that we live in here. We didn't expect all this chaos in the House this year, or maybe we did. We didn't expect we certainly didn't see this war with Israel and Hamas playing out. That's impacted world events and also the presidential election. And who knows where the economy is a year on out. So just so many questions as we assess what's going to happen next year.
Okay, well, thank you both very much. This has been great. I'll make my one little prediction. I think both Trump and Biden need a good doctor, and I think something could happen on the medical front where you wake up in the morning and find out that someone had a heart attack or some issue, and then that will send everything into
Stay tuned to Axios and CNN for the latest.
Yes, watch the news.
I think when you've got candidates that are this old, anything could happen. So we will see. But thank you all very much, and we will do this again. And again, hope everybody has a great day and support the American Swiss Foundation. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.